Hey there, welcome back for another Duggar discussion. Today we're going to dive into the updates to Title IX. I wanted to share a video from Moms for Liberty with you to help you understand exactly what these changes are going to mean for our children in schools. Because I know that when I took a look at the final document, I didn't understand it. So hopefully this will help clear up some questions. But before we get started, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. That'll help make sure YouTube gets it out to other moms that might need it. Um, Now, I know as moms, we're busy. We've got all the day-to-day to-dos to do. And like me, you may not have thought a lot about politics, but recently I realized that these changes and policies that have been going on over the last few years are having a significant impact on children and on our families. And I have come to believe that it's important for us as moms to stay informed about what's going on in our country with the laws and regulations so that we can be prepared for how these changes might impact our families. So, like I mentioned, this Title IX update is quite difficult to absorb, to understand when you look at the full thing. It's over 1,500 pages. And so I was so glad when I found this video from Moms for Liberty. She brought on a couple of experts and they really helped to break it down so that it's understandable how these changes are going to impact children in the schools. So I thought it'd be interesting for us to watch it together today. There's going to be a few parts we'll skip over, but I do want to watch a good majority of it with you, and then I'll link it below in the description so that if you want to go back and watch the rest of it later, you'll have the link to find it easily. Okay. So let's get started.
Hey, Joyful Warriors, Tiffany Justin here. Happy to be with you today to discuss a really important topic, Title IX. As many of you know, the Biden administration just released the new Title IX rule on April 19th. And I have two Joyful Warriors joining us today. Sarah Perry, who works with Heritage Foundation. She's going to tell you a little bit about the work she does there. And Kim Herman, who is the Executive Director of Southeastern Legal Foundation. Two friends who have helped me to understand a little bit more about Title IX, its history, where we are today, and why these changes to the rules matter. So, Sarah, Kim, welcome to the Joyful Warrior podcast. Why don't you both just take a minute to introduce yourselves and tell us about the work that you do?
I'll go first. I am a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation and the Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, which, yes, that is a mouthful. But I am former senior counsel for civil rights at the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, and had an opportunity under the previous administration to actually work on a Title IX rule that helps strengthen due process protections for individuals on college campuses, helps strengthen religious expression protections, and made sure that we understood sexual misconduct and sexual harassment to be sex discrimination. So it was really a protective rule that was designed to really a benefit for everyone. So this is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart because all of the work we did in the previous administration, of course, has just gone the way of the dodo with a brand new 1,500-page regulation that was just released 2 weeks ago. So that is my backstory.
My goodness, American moms and dads are reeling right now trying to understand all about Title IX. Now, Kim, you've been a good friend since we started Moms for Liberty, helping me to navigate a lot of the different legal waters that I would find myself in. I'm not a lawyer, but certainly the areas of policy and law are constantly intersecting with Americans in their lives. And, you know, you and I both know we've seen a nation wake up because of COVID, right? And really see that some of our liberties are under attack. So tell us about the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm executive director here at Southeastern Legal Foundation, and we're a public interest law firm, which simply means that when the government infringes on your constitutional rights, we're here to sue them and to hold them accountable. Coincidentally, we were actually founded by former Attorney General Ed Meese. And so Sarah and I have a lot of ties together, besides just friendship and being mama bears in this fight. Back in 2020, we saw what was happening in schools, just like so many other parents. I'm a parent myself of a first and a fourth grader, and we knew we had to get in the fight. We started working with grassroots groups that were forming, like Moms for Liberty. We started filing lawsuits. And Title IX has obviously been on our radar since the very beginning. We knew from day one of Joe Biden's administration that he was going to attack it. He was going to tear it apart, and he was going to fundamentally change the definition of sex in this country. And so we're here now to help educate parents and start filing lawsuits. So in the next couple of weeks, keep an eye out for what we've got coming.
I just want to stop real quick for a minute. I want to mention that I'm going to include the links to that final regulation document for Title IX updates. There's fact sheets that you'll hear them mention. I'll link to those as well. So all that will be in the description if you want to go and peruse those resources.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here today. So let's jump in a little bit. Title IX, something that maybe a lot of Americans have heard of, but maybe they don't know the historical background. So Sarah, why don't you bring us up to speed about when Title IX was enacted and why?
So this was actually the crowning achievement of the women's liberation movement, right? So they were unsuccessful in passing the Equal Rights Amendment. For that, we say thank God. It was an entirely different subject of another podcast we can do and wax on poetically about, but they did achieve equality in education in a single sentence prohibition on sex discrimination in any federally funded education program. Now, a lot of people think that this is simply the athletics rule. Athletics actually did not come into play until the 1978 regulations were enacted. So as it was originally enacted, it was simply the prohibition on sex discrimination. Later regulations sort of put in practice the ways that this would actually apply to any federally funded program in education. But I want to say something about federal funding, because I think
Now, there has been quite a bit in the media here lately, especially with the Olympics and having men against women. And we know there's been a lot in the media about this happening in schools as well. So some of these Title IX updates are even basically undoing that amendment from the 70s where they made it so that women could have sports alongside of men having their sports. We know that, there's an unfair advantage. If a woman is on a men's team or vice versa. And so that amendment gave us women's sports. And now we see in so many schools, all the way middle school, down to middle school, up into college. I know Riley Gaines has been in social media a lot, speaking about her experience. And I saw a recent story pop up about a school in West Virginia, I believe it was, where they were allowing boys to compete against the girls on an supposed to be all girls team. So this is having a major impact in sports as well. So I do want to skip just a little bit here. You get where she gets into a little bit more about the exact changes. Let me see.
Later regulations sort of put in practice the ways that this would actually apply to any federally funded program in education. But I want to say something about federal funding, because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding on how this will actually apply. Many people think it's just college and it's just college sports at that, when in fact, this is any educational program that receives so much as $1 of federal funding, whether directly or indirectly, as the Supreme Court has ruled. So if you take a child on a reduced lunch program, you are subject to Title IX. If you receive a Pell Grant and go to college on a Pell Grant to a private college, you also are subject to Title IX. So this touches preschool all the way through graduate school, trade schools, vocational schools, charter schools, private schools, and public schools. In fact, the only institutions it won't touch is religious schools, but those schools who are religious have to express their religious objection. And then the Biden administration has told us they may or may not get a religious exemption. It will be determined, thank you to this new rule, on a case-by-case basis. But the history on this is significant because the Democrats in the House and in the Senate passed back and forth between education committees 250 versions of this bill. So when we hear things like sex is now expanded to gender identity or expression, no one in their right mind would say with a straight face that when this was debated on the floor in 1971, leading into 1972, that this was ever anything other than biological sex, particularly because one of the laws that sponsored Senator Burge Bai of Indiana talked about wanting to break the stereotype that girls were just pretty little things who didn't want to go to school or play sports. So that was significant. There were really so many comments in the congressional record about sort of beating back those sort of traditionalist notions of little girls being left home and not wanting to go to school, not being rough and tumble like boys. So you can see exactly where those iterations of modern feminism have gotten us, right? So you continue to intersect the left, and then of course the left begins to eat its own, and we have the Title IX of today.
What she mentions there is important. This whole gender identity thing. You know, when I was growing up, I was a big tomboy. Didn't mean that I was born in the wrong body. Didn't mean that I should have been a man. It just meant that I was a little girl that enjoyed playing football with my cousins, or I enjoyed playing outside with the bugs and the critters. And then, you know, there's boys that, you know, sometimes little boys like to play with dolls. It does not mean that they should have been a girl and they were born in the wrong body. No, it just means that they're a little boy. Maybe they've got a sibling and they see their mama holding their baby brother or baby sister, and they want to play that out with a baby doll. That does not mean that they are a female inside. It just means they're a kid and they're just playing out what they see. So this new Title IX, this new definition with gender ideology is not in any way progressive. It's actually regressive. That's where she mentioned Title IX was those changes in the 70s were put in place to get rid of those stereotypes that only girls could play with dolls and only boys could play sports in it. Broke through those stereotypes and recognized that children have different interests. And now we're putting those stereotypes right back into place. Oh, well, if your little boy wants to play with dolls, that must mean he's a girl because only girls play with dolls. And if your little girl wants to play sports, oh, that must mean she's actually a boy because only boys play sports. No, those are stereotypes. It is so regressive that we have, you know, made these changes and tried to redefine gender. And it's really hurting our children. Let me skip ahead a little bit and we will look a little bit, let them explain a little bit more about what these updates are specifically and how they're affecting our children in school.
Over 1,500 pages of regulations. It was released on April 19th. I know you guys have been reading through all of these many pages, and I know I've been calling you and saying, okay, we need information. We need to put information out. And so I appreciate your patience with us. Moms for Liberty just released a toolkit for Title IX, where we've got a fact sheet and we've got letters that you can send. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this podcast. But tell us, Sarah, what do these Title IX regulations, these new rules, excuse me, what do they do now? How are parents going to see this in their K through 12 schools?
Yeah, so I can't overstate the sort of expansive, but I think more appropriately destructive nature of this rule. This is something that is such a vast rewrite of a very simple prohibition on sex discrimination that it really is going to touch almost every aspect of American education. So we start, first of all, with that expansion to sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and pregnancy or related conditions, including, thank you, Catherine Lehman, termination of pregnancy, which actually sets the foundation for abortion as a civil right within Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. We're going to see now an increased push for abortion counseling services, a taxpayer dollar. We're going to see the potential provision of abortion services through health clinics on college.
I want to stop there real quick too, because this is just mind-boggling to me. Instead of putting in place services to, help explain to children the importance of waiting and the importance of protection if you don't wait. We're putting abortion clinics in schools. Our kids shouldn't even be getting pregnant, much less have an abortion clinic right next door so they can, take an action that they may regret for the rest of their lives. It's just, it absolutely boggles the mind that they would do that instead of, maybe putting more thought into sex education and abstinence and protection instead of, oh, well, let's just do this. You've got a clinic right here. Just do this and you can just forget it ever happened and just get on with your life. Even though that's not the way it works. Even if you're trying to think of the best way to say this, we know there have been women who have had abortions, and it is not just a simple go have it done and forget about it thing. Those decisions and those actions stay with a person. You are taking a life. That's not something that you can just forget about, finish school, go on about the rest of your life and never think about again. This is just completely backwards. And we should be putting programs in school to help prevent teenage pregnancy, not encourage the actions that we know lead to pregnancy, and then, oh, we'll just kill it and go on with your life. Just absolutely boggles my mind.
College campuses or through K through 12 schools as well at taxpayer expense. So that's a significant expansion. We're also going to see the bathroom, locker room, housing accommodation, and overnight hotel room accommodations. For example, field trips or school trips, sports trips, all now expanded. They are all, for all intents and purposes now, gender neutral, with anyone of any sex identifying any way that they want, staying with whatever biological sex they want.
This is scary. The idea that, we have had separated, overnight field trips. We have separated boys and girls for decades for a reason. Because I'm not saying that the boys are going to take advantage, which sadly there are some of those cases, but just because of the fact that, when you get old enough to start going on those, overnight field trips, you're at an age where you might do something that you shouldn't be doing. And I think everybody knows what I mean. So putting kids into a position where they're going to be tempted to do something that they shouldn't be doing in the first place is crazy. Not to mention, in extreme cases, it could be dangerous. That there may be, especially getting older into teenage years, junior, senior years, there may be situations where the boys may be saying that to just take advantage of another girl. I hate to just default to that, but we know that that sometimes happens. And to put these girls in a position where they are, vulnerable, not to mention, even at younger ages, these girls, I know when I was at that age, I would not have felt comfortable sleeping in a room with a boy, taking showers in the locker room or changing with another boy. It was uncomfortable enough with other girls because, your bodies are changing. Things are just not like they used to be. And it's awkward. We should not be forcing our children into these uncomfortable situations. It's just how the people, the politicians manage to get this passed. I, it just it's crazy to me. Anybody with a lick of sense knows that, there is a reason we keep boys separate and girls separate. There's a reason that we have boys' bathrooms and girls' bathrooms. It just I don't understand how this ended up getting through, but it's important that we know about it so that we as mothers know what's going on in the schools and we can take action if it's going on in a school in your area, that the school your child goes to, so that you can be prepared and take action if needed. And even if it's not going on in a school in your area, I'm in Tennessee. Right now, Tennessee has a case against this. And so thank goodness it's not happening in our schools. But even for those of us that are not directly impacted by this, we need to speak up, because if we don't, and I've been complacent in the past, I'm not trying to guilt trip anybody or anything like that. I was complacent for a long time. It's hard to speak up against these things, but complacency is how we got where we are. And if we don't start speaking out now, even if it's not where you're at, it's going to be, because all this has done is get worse and worse and spread farther and farther. So, okay, I'll get off my little rant there and we'll get back to the video.
That is unconscionable, but it doesn't end there. This is always also going to impact free speech protections. And this is the part of the rule that is so patently unconstitutional. I'm absolutely shocked that someone didn't say to President Biden or to Catherine Lehman at the time, guys, this isn't going to survive legal muster, but who knows? Maybe the sort of politically craven attempt here was an effort to do as much damage in as little time as possible before November 8th. But this actually makes the sort of crime, and I'm using air quotes, of misgendering an individual or failing to use preferred pronouns actionable as a Title IX sex harassment claim.
I apologize. I keep stopping it, but this is absolutely, don't want to say terrifying, but it is scary. What they're saying there is that if somebody says, a boy says, oh, my pronouns are she, her, or a girl says, my pronouns are he, him, which is not biological reality. They're saying if you do not go along with their delusion, if another boy or girl, if your child in school does not go along with this other child's delusion, that is punishable by law now. You know, that is scary that they are forcing or trying to force us to go along with a delusion. Otherwise, there's legal ramifications. These are scary times that we live in, and I hope that some people with some sense take action to repeal these changes or whatever they need to do. The legal cases, you'll hear them talking about in a little bit. I hope that they can get this pulled back as soon as possible, because this could have some very serious consequences for children who are not willing to just throw away reality and give in to the delusion.
You can actually file a claim now with the Office for Civil Rights, your local Office for Civil Rights, and there are 12 offices around the country. In addition to the national office where I worked in Washington, D.C., you can file a claim now. If someone misgenders you, well, that's not only going to compel your speech. If you are, for example, a believer or conservative Christian who doesn't want to express someone's gender identity,
Or just someone who
that's
believes in the
exactly
truth,
it. If you have a
biological
moral or
truth.
scientific or religious objection to this, you've just been forced to say something that you don't believe. And alternatively, you've been prevented from expressing how you do believe. So
Yeah, and that's a good point there. This is not just religious. Oh, it's scientific. It is biological reality that this boy is a boy and this girl is a girl. And so I think back to, our very first physicians, Hippocrates, the Greeks, and other ancient civilizations who understood that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And what would they think about us today? That we don't even, that there are people in society that don't even understand that basic biological truth. It's just, thank goodness those ancient people are not still around. They would think we were absolutely crazy. But it is sad to see how regressed so many in society have become by giving in to this lie. I mean, that's all it is. It's just a lie. Let me go ahead and skip a little bit here. They do speak a little bit about some of the effects for college students. So if you do have a college age child, I do recommend going back and listening to it. But I know a lot of us are, most of us have middle-aged, high school age children right now. So I am going to go ahead and skip ahead because this is a pretty long episode.
Black boy, black man.
Oh, I apologize. We've got an ad here, and let me skip by that.
What if recording high quality content, editing like a pro, and streaming like a star?
Mind it changing the whole culture of our country. It's so where do we go from here? I know I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the education leaders first that we saw come out. We saw Kate Brumley in Louisiana. We saw Ellen Weaver. We saw Governor DeSantis and Manny Diaz and others coming forward and saying, hold up, school districts, because these changes do not go into effect until August 1st. And we believe there's going to be some legal challenges to them. But from someone who's worked in a school district before, I understand there are many school districts who are readying themselves for this. If it goes into effect in August 1st, they're going to need to do hiring in order to be in compliance, change the different ways that their school is working. And so what do you think happens right now, Sarah, when it comes to the districts? Because they're kind of, they're getting their superintendent is telling them hold, But I would imagine that there's a lot of guidance that will be coming to them that says, no, get ready.
Yeah, and this is gonna be a very complicated landscape. My heart goes out to local administrative education officers and just the state education agencies as well. But we've seen a number of state superintendents send out letters to their local education associations, their LEAs, and have really been gratified to see the expression of character on their part, saying, listen, this is going to be tied up in federal litigation. And by the way, PS, now we know that it is, right? There are at least 4 federal lawsuits with more on the way.
Oh, we're gonna get
Right.
there.
So I think rightly, the school superintendents have said, listen, this is going to be subject to legal challenges. And we could, for all intents and purposes, see it suspended if, for example, we are successful in any of these lawsuits and are able to get a preliminary injunction that actually hits pause on the operation of this rule while it works its way through the courts. But these local education associations, honestly, my heart goes out to them because they may be receiving conflicting evidence. And I would not be surprised before, let's say, for argument's sake, Catherine Lehman leaves office, if she sends a dear colleague letter saying, you better implement these changes or your federal funding is at risk. So it's an untenable situation to be put in.
It really truly is. It's difficult on the ground. And so, we work really hard at Moms for Liberty to get good, solid, liberty-minded individuals endorsed and then elected to the school board. And so in this new Title IX toolkit that we're releasing, and if you go to our website, it's there right now. There's a template letter that you can send to your school board members to make them aware of these changes and pending changes, but to tell them just the state of where we are right now. And to
I am going to link below. That toolkit is a little bit more difficult to find. So I'll put the link below to the main page. It'll have all of the different templates that they're talking about. It'll have a fact sheet that kind of puts down the most important points of the new updates. So I do encourage you to go and take a look at that. When I checked the page out, it looked like they had a lot of good information for parents. I know Moms for Liberty is really good. They've got a lot of people that they can call on, experts, and they've created a lot of resources. Also, if you're not a member of Moms for Liberty yet and you want to join, you can join just as I think it's referred to as a national member for free. I joined recently, so there's a paid membership as well, but you don't have to do the paid membership. I do encourage you to join the free membership just to stay up to date. They send out updates, current news and current issues. It's just a good way to stay up to date on issues that may be affecting our kids in school. All right, let me skip ahead just a little bit more. And we'll watch 1 or 2 more clips here, just short parts before we wrap it up.
Across the way, but when I'm at the police station, the thing is, I told the new department, and one of the officers responded by saying,
plaster the walls with gender confusion for kids. Sarah, let's talk about the federal action that we can take, the call to action regarding the federal government. We put up a template for a sample letter, and a template that parents can use to write to their senator or their representative and to let them know that they'd like them to invoke the Congressional Review Act. And so can we talk about what that means and what that looks like and why it's important?
Yeah, the Congressional Review Act is an opportunity for the members of both chambers, the upper and lower chamber, to be able to downvote a rule that they think is financially unfeasible or not legally sound. And believe it or not, it was invoked over 100 times during the Trump administration. It was successful about 16 of those times. So there are instances in which Congress is able to say, we are the last stop before this gets to the president's desk for a sign off. And this is a 60-day legislative window. So important to remember, it's not 60 calendar days, but 60 legislative days. And within that window, we need either chamber, upper or lower, to get 2/3 of its membership to essentially downvote a rule for that to be able to go to the president's desk. Now, we know that the president will veto any congressional review act challenge that lands there, but here's why it's important, because it tolls the clock on the enforcement of this rule formally, because Congress is the last stop before it goes back to the Department of Education for formal enforcement at that point. But until those 60 legislative days are won, essentially, and we've gone through the entire process, it does also at the same time give litigators an opportunity to move forward in motions practice with their actual work, right? And see if they can get past the motion to dismiss phase, or possibly get a temporary injunction to kind of stem the tide a little bit. And I think that's what I'm hopeful for personally, is that of all of these states, and now we've got 15 states, as Kim mentioned, and 4 membership organizations, in addition to a multitude of now school board members. And I know distinctly that some school districts themselves are actually looking at this. Superintendents of schools are actually looking at this. So I would not be surprised if there was a flurry of litigation activity. But even in the states that have already banded together, in the 7th Circuit, the 4th Circuit, the 11th Circuit, they're at this point, if they're able to temporarily enjoin it in their circuit, those schools have a temporary pass on implementation.
They mentioned that there were several states that have the enjoyment or have been enjoined. I do have the list here. Me believe it's, apologize. Can't remember which, here it is, last tab, of course. So as of July 31st, pursuant to the federal court orders, the department is currently enjoined from enforcing the 2024 rule in the states of Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So it's my understanding, based on what they were sharing in this, that the schools in those states are currently not required to follow the, or let me try to word that, because I know that that word enjoined is not one that we use in our everyday language. The way I understand it, these states are not currently required, and they cannot currently be forced, or basically they're exempt. That's a good way to put it. These states currently, the schools in those states are exempt from enforcing the new updates, the final rule. So if you are from that state, then I would still encourage you to be informed, though, because although they're not currently required to follow this final rule, and hopefully the courts will rule against it or downvote it, like she was referring to, there's no guarantee. And so I know I'm in one of those states that's not currently enforcing it, but I still feel it's important to stay informed, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Okay, one more little clip here. Let me see.
Which is why I think these superintendents
Okay.
have done the right thing in saying, listen, this could very well be tied up. And the superintendents in those schools who sent those letters in those states have often coincided with the states who are bringing the legal action. So they're working together hand in hand. I think it's a very encouraging response because they were ready for this and they want to make sure that the students in their educational systems are protected. And a lot of them have said, listen, we don't really care if our federal funding is at risk. We know there's a lot of it, right? Billions of dollars, as many of them have identified in the pleadings. But quite frankly, it's our tax money anyway, and the rule's illegal. So you can't divest us from it if we're able to hit pause on this right now in a court of law.
Preliminary injunction is like
That's
hitting
exactly it.
pause. Is that right? Okay. And so then what happens? So there's a preliminary injunction. So just kind of run us through, because I think people really want to understand what the steps are and what to anticipate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
so first the case.
yeah, go ahead,
Sarah.
Kim. Go ahead, Kim.
I was saying, first the cases get filed, and in all of these cases, the plaintiffs are going to be asking the court for preliminary injunction, right? There's a time period, court cases do take some time, right? There's a time period that the Department of Education will have to file an answer. They will have a chance to respond to these motions for preliminary injunction that are going to be filed. And then ultimately the courts will rule on those particular preliminary injunctions. Now that's exactly what it is. It's preliminary. So if a court thinks that the plaintiffs can actually eventually prove their case once you go through the entire process of litigation, and they can see that there's an immediate harm happening, which there is no doubt that there is an immediate harm here to these students throughout our country and to the states and to the organizations, then they will issue that injunction. Now, the injunction could relate just to that judicial circuit. So like Sarah was saying, it could just be, the 11th Circuit where it's Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Or it could be what's called a nationwide injunction, where it actually pauses it for the entire country. And then I have no doubt that if that's what happened, the Department of Education is going to go straight to the Supreme Court. And there are different processes here where they will try to expedite Supreme Court review. And ultimately, it will be in the hands of our justices to make.
Now, this video is a few months old, so we know that those Title IX updates did go into effect on August 1st in all states except for those few that I read earlier. So we can see that they were not able to do a nationwide pause on this. So it's important to, especially if you're in the states that are currently enforcing this final rule, to be educated on what that means for your child in school and to start looking for resources to fight this. So I'm so grateful that Moms for Liberty has put up those resources on their website. I highly encourage you, if your child is in a school where they are enforcing this, to use some of those resources so that we can fight back against this. It is harming our children, confusing our children, lying to them, trying to force them to just throw aside reality for this delusion is harming our children. And then, and we can talk about this more in depth in another episode, but this, we know, enforcing that delusion, we know, has led to medical interventions that are not reversible. So this is certainly doing harm to our children. So I just hope that they are able to, even though they were not able to put a nationwide pause on it, I know states are still fighting back. Moms are still fighting back. The more moms that we have going to their states' leaders to encourage them to fight back, the better. And I just have a little bit more. I know this is a long one. If you'll stick with me just a little bit longer, there's some points coming up that I do think are important to talk about before we wrap up.
The
decision if they want to weigh in earlier or later. It gets a little bit complicated, but there is no doubt that this is headed to the Supreme Court. It's just a matter of when are they going to make the decision that they want to weigh in. And we also know that they go into recess over the summer. And so there are certain circumstances where they can still continue working. It's really up to them how they want to continue. And Sarah, you may have something to add to that I forgot. It's a long court process, and it's something that we do every day here at SLF. So sometimes we take it for granted
Yeah.
that
no,
we just live in this
You're
every day.
100% right. It is 100% destined for the Supreme Court. And I have to tell you, they are no fans. Those justices are no fans of this administration's attempt to manipulate federal law to reach its own aims. Listen, we just saw in the West Virginia versus EPA case in 2022 that you can't make significant rule changes with vast, what they called political and financial impact without clear congressional authorization. Well, I don't, if this isn't political and financial
This is
impact,
bad.
I have no idea what it is. So I think it's either going to be a very fiery opinion written by maybe somebody like a Justice Alito, or it could be a very easy one-page disposition saying, see what we wrote in 2022 in your previous attempts to manipulate the Clean Air Act.
Yes.
And in which case,
Yeah.
then the rules are
Yeah,
struck down.
yes.
It would. And then what's going to happen is we're going to still have schools that try to implement it, right? We have seen school districts throughout our country before this final rule
Yeah.
trying to implement these exact same things that are in the rule, and then just say, well, that's how we're interpreting it. Those are the protections that we want to give to our students when we know they're really just civil rights violations. And so this battle will not even just be over with that. It is then going to be the second round of cases that I know we've been talking about a lot, where parents have to stand up, they have to know what's happening in their school, and they have to educate their kids on these issues,
yeah.
both at the K through 12 and the college level. Educate them on their rights and let them know that they have them. Because a lot of kids they don't even realize that they have these rights, because we all know they're not being taught them in school.
That's an important point as well. Our schools are not teaching what they taught a few decades ago. The history is not gone into as deeply, if at all. I know it's different from state to state, so some states may still provide a pretty good history curriculum, but a lot aren't. Our Constitution isn't being taught in a lot of schools. I've seen social media videos where people are going out and asking students, who signed the Declaration of Independence, and students don't know these things. Showing pictures of our forefathers, and students don't know who they are. So the important history of our country, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, those things are not being taught in school. I have seen videos of people burning our American flag. Patriotism is no longer being taught in school. Historically, before we had, big public schools and institutions, the mothers educated their children. That was one of the big benefits of the Title IX originally, was so women were educated and they could in turn teach their children. But even before then, women have always historically been the parent to pass their values and the culture onto the next generation. I know there's modern feminists who try to say women have been oppressed, but no, that's not correct. Women, mothers, shape society because we are the ones passing on our values to the next generation, to our society's next generation. So it's so important. The schools are not doing their job to educate our children. We have to at home. Now, I'm not saying you have to go pull your child out of school. I homeschool my daughter. I took her out of school prior to this for different reasons, but that is an option for sure. But definitely not required. In the evenings, when your child gets home from school, like she mentioned, teach your kids what their rights are. They do not have to bow to the government. The government is supposed to be selected and by us and be protecting its citizens. They are supposed to rule at the will of the people, not to, hold down the people or, you know, spread their agenda at the expense of the people, which is what we are seeing right now. So definitely, just as it's been throughout history, moms, teach your kids, teach the important things. Math is important, yes, reading is important, yes, but your child knowing their rights is much more important in the times that we live in today. So if nothing else, at least go over their history with them, teach them what it means to be an American citizen and the rights that they have so they can so that they can know that whatever's being asked of them at school, if it is, following these Title IX updates, that is unconstitutional and that is being fought against so that when they grow up, they know what their rights are. So apologize. I've had a couple of little rants this evening. I'll stop there. I know there's a lot more we could go into this with the gender ideology and with what schools are teaching and all of this. And we'll probably do some episodes on those topics as well. So we'll save that for another day. But I definitely want to thank you for joining me to discuss this video and these changes and what they mean for the children in our country and the families in our country. And again, I encourage you to go and check out the full episode. It's a lot to take in. It's hard to get it all in on one Duggar discussion, but definitely go check them out. They have a podcast, so you can just play it on your phone while you're washing the dishes or while you're cooking supper. That's how I consume a lot of these episodes instead of the videos. So I highly encourage you to do that. And thank you for joining me this evening. I will see you back for the next Duggar discussion. Bye-bye.